Good day, everyone, and good day, ma'am. My name is Lawrence Alpamaong, and today I will be discussing Chapter 5 using word scaffolding, student learning in a language classroom. Under the topic Open ended tools and their uses in teaching and learning language skills. So, before we begin, let me ask you a question, and this is: have you ever been reading a story and suddenly stop because you didn't understand one word? Well, I'm sure many of us have experienced that, and sometimes one unfamiliar word can make an entire sentence difficult to understand. And this is where word scaffolding becomes important. It helps students understand new vocabulary little by little until they can understand or they can use those words independently. In this presentation, we'll learn what word scaffolding is, why it's important, its theories, benefits, and strategies that teachers can use inside a language classroom. So let's get started. Let's begin with the introduction. Word scaffolding is a teaching approach that gives students temporary support while learning new vocabulary. The keyword here is temporary because the teacher doesn't help students forever, and the goal is to guide students until they become confident enough to understand and use new words on their own. So instead of simply giving definitions, teachers provide examples, pictures, questions, gestures, and meaningful situations to help students understand unfamiliar vocabulary. So think of it like learning to ride a bicycle. At first, of course, someone will help you balance, but as you gain confidence, that support slowly remove, and that exactly word scaffolding works in a language learning. Now let's have a quick overview. So the word scaffolding is based on the ideas of Jerome Bruner and Lev Vygotsky, especially Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, or ZPD. No, their theories explain that students learn best when teachers provide guidance while learning something new. So some common scaffolding strategies include introducing important vocabulary before reading, using pictures and gestures, and teaching students to use context clues. So these strategies help students become active and independent learners instead of simply memorizing words. So what exactly is scaffolding? Well, scaffolding is a temporary support that teachers provide to help students learn vocabulary and language skills. So the support can be questions, examples, visuals, sentence starters, or guided practice. As students improve, the teachers gradually removes the support until students can complete the task independently. For example, imagine you're teaching the word predict. Instead of giving the meaning immediately, you show a picture from a story and ask, what do you think will happen next? Well, students make guesses, discuss ideas, and eventually learn what the word predict means through the activity. And this makes learning more meaningful because students discover the meaning themselves. The first theory comes from Jerome Bruner, who introduced the idea of scaffolding in the 1960s. He believed that students learn better when teachers provide support while introducing new knowledge. So the teacher acts as a guide instead of simply giving answers. For example, if students are learning the word responsibility, well, the teacher can first explain it, give real life examples, ask students to identify responsible actions, and finally, let students create their own examples. Notice how the teacher's support becomes less over time. So the main idea of Brunner's theory is that guidance helps students become independent learners. The second theory is from Lev Vygotsky. He introduced the zone of proximal development, or ZPD. This means that there are things students cannot do alone but can do with the help of a teacher or a more knowledgeable person. For example, a student doesn't know the word fragile, so the teacher shows a glass and asks, what happens if this falls? So the student answers, it breaks easily. So then the teachers introduces the word fragile. So next time the students already understand the word without help. So this shows learning inside the zone of proximal development. In simple words, Vygotsky teaches us that learning happens best when students receive the right amount of support. Now that we understand the theories, let's discuss the benefits of word scaffolding. There are three main benefits. First, students learn vocabulary in meaningful context. Second, students understand text more easily. And third, students become independent vocabulary learners. Let's look at each one. The first benefit is meaningful vocabulary learning, wherein students remember words better when they connect new vocabulary with something they already knew. So instead of memorizing definitions, they connect words with experiences and real life situations. For example, if you're teaching the word celebrate, ask students what celebrations do you have at home. They might answer birthdays, Christmas, or graduation. So now students understand the word through their own experiences, and this makes vocabulary easier to remember. The second benefit is better understanding of text. So sometimes students don't understand a passage because they encounter too many unfamiliar words. So word scaffolding removes those barriers. Before reading, teachers introduce important vocabulary so students already know the difficult words. For example, before reading a story about nature, introduce words like habitat, environment, and pollution. When students read a passage, they focus more on understanding the story instead of struggling with vocabulary. The third benefit is independence, wherein students learn strategies to understand unfamiliar words without immediately asking the teacher. One important strategy is using context clues. For example, the exhausted runner sat down after finishing the marathon. So even if the students don't know the word exhausted, they can guess it means very tired because of the sentence around it. Over time, students become more confident readers. Now that we've learned why word scaffolding is helpful, the next question is how can teachers use it inside the classroom? So let's discuss the three simple but effective strategies. The first strategy is introducing important vocabulary before reading or listening activities. This is called front-loading vocabulary. So the teachers teach difficult words before students encounter them in the lesson. For example, before reading about climate change, introduce words like climate, drought, and flood so students become familiar with the vocabulary before reading the text. The second strategy is pairing vocabulary with pictures, gestures, or real objects. So students learn better when they both see and hear a word. For example, if teaching the word stretch, don't just explain it. Actually demonstrate stretching with your arms so students immediately connect the action with the vocabulary. So this strategy is especially helpful for visual and young learners. The third strategy is teaching students to use surrounding words to determine meaning. Instead of giving definitions immediately, teachers encourage students to become word detectives. For example, the desert is arid. It receives very little rainfall. So students can infer that arid means dry because of the second sentence. This develops critical thinking while reading. To conclude, word scaffolding is an effective teaching approach because it supports students while they learn new vocabulary and gradually help them become independent learners. So we'll learn that scaffolding is based on the theories of Jerome Bruner and Lev Vygotsky. We also discuss its three main benefits: meaningful vocabulary learning, better reading comprehension, and independent learning. And finally, we explored practical strategies teachers can use, such as font loading, vocabulary, using visuals and gestures, and teaching context clues. As a future educators, these strategies can help us create language classroom where students feel supported, confident, and motivated to learn new words. The ideas presented in this discussion are based on references included in our PowerPoint, particularly educational materials on word scaffolding and language teaching strategies. So these references support the concepts and theories discussed in this presentation. And that ends my presentation. I hope this discussion helped you understand what word scaffolding is and how it helps students develop vocabulary and language skills in a meaningful way. So always remember that goal of scaffolding is not to make students depend on a teacher, but to help them become confident and independent learners. So thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful day.